You ready? Okay, all right. So again, thank you for the opportunity to present tonight. This is just a report that we've done, I guess, for the past 3 years or so, where we've done just a comparison data presentation for 3 different clusters of school districts that just have a little bit of description required around those. But tonight we're just going to talk about the data comparison timeline, why it's set up, and why it's done in the second half of the year, not at the beginning of the year. Just review who those district groups are that we're comparing ourselves to. You'll see data from the past 3 years for ELA and math that's organized in some really small charts that sometimes are hard to kind of distinguish, but I'll talk about that a little bit as well. And then just some general notes and observations about each comparison group, and then overall, at the conclusion of observation, just some overall notes and observations about all the groups. In terms of data preparation, we are using a product called Forecast 5 Analytics. This is actually an organization that we purchased the product from this year that actually takes, when the state releases publicly available data, like performance reports for districts, like enrollment reports for districts, when they look at finance information, all of that's released at different points during the year. The way the state releases it, it's very difficult to kind of go in and begin to organize that information. It's a really manually intensive task. So this organization, this company actually has set up systems and algorithms that allow that analytics process to happen fairly quickly. In December, the state actually released the performance information for the entire state. It was one kind of massive data release that's kind of just put out to everybody, and you can go to state websites and you can begin to access that information, but again, it's not in the easiest format to work with on the site. In January 2020, Forecast 5 had taken that information, they put it into their system, so then we were able to manipulate that a little bit more. And then really all the graphics kind of included within this presentation were generated by Forecast 5. That's why they're kind of set up and kind of formatted in the same way going through each one of those presentations. We have 3 comparison groups that we're looking to just make comparisons to. So when we look at the first group, these are all I and J districts that are district factor grouping districts. So again, it's looking at socioeconomic status of the districts. Do they kind of all fall within the same range? So generally, I and J are the 2 highest socioeconomic groups within the state. There are also districts that have an enrollment that's about 25% or within 25% of Warren's enrollment as well. The comparison group 2 are, again, districts that the board elected to have comparisons made to. So when you look at these districts, you can see the profile of these districts tend to be K-12 districts. These are very, very highly successful districts across the state. Berners Township, Milburn, Livingston are all very, very reputable districts. Again, these are districts, again, when you look at factors like DFG, tend to be all I and J, but also when you look at the enrollment, these are K-12 districts. Some of them are twice the size of us. Some of them are more than twice the size of us. So, you know, again, they're not quite like Warren in the sense of just the way that they're set up and organized, but they are districts that have excellent programming that, you know, there's merit to actually taking a look at those and seeing how we compare to them as well. Comparison group 3 are just the regional districts that we're comparing ourselves to. So these are all the ones that feed into Washington Hills Regional High School. All right. So we're going to look at comparison group 1 first. The way this chart is set up, and I know it's in 3 different places. It's actually better on the TVs. But you can see, again, the grade levels kind of indicated over here. Okay, the year, we're looking at 17, 18, 19 for each cluster of grade levels. The red line is the median score. And then the blue dot here is Warren Township. So when you look at the TV screens, it's actually a little bit easier to see. You can see the distribution. Again, for grade 3, if you look across on that, you can see Warren, again, in comparison to all of those districts, has an upward trend over 3 years in terms of performance in language arts. You can see, again, like grade 4 has a score here that went up in 2018, went down in 2019. You can see just different patterns that are kind of emerging, all right, within the district. Grade 8, for instance, has an upward trend over 3 years. Grade 7 has an upward trend over 3 years. Grade 6 is somewhat stable over the past 3 years in terms of their performance. So again, it allows us to see just how we did in terms of our trend over the past few years, and also where we compare with all the districts within that comparison group. All right, when you look at just K-8 districts, it gives a bit of a different picture in terms of ELA. You can see, again, Obviously, there's fewer districts, but also you can see Warren, in comparison, moves above the median in almost all of those areas as well. So it just kind of gives a different picture. When you're comparing to K-8 districts, they tend to be a little bit more similar just in the way that they're organized and the way that, that services are provided within those districts. All right. Grade 3-8 math, you can get a sense again of how Warren does in comparison to all of those other districts. You can see how we do in comparison to the median. One area of note on the bottom is, grade 8 math, and I'll make this point a number of times during this. We have a lot of students that do not participate in grade 8 math because most of our students participate in Algebra J and K. So anywhere from a given year, from 25 to 30% of our students will do grade 8 math. Anywhere from about 65 to 75% of our students will end up doing algebra in grade 8. All right, so it's important to kind of recognize that that's a difference in the way that score distributions are handled within each of those districts. You get a sense of just the K-8 districts. In some grade levels, in certain years, we're the highest performing K-8 district. In this comparison group. Again, when you look at trend data, you try to note, are there a constantly declining trend or a constantly increasing trend from any one given year? Those are things that we take a look at. All right. Here's how we do in terms of algebra. It's important to note here that, like, when you look at that grade 7 year, it doesn't mean that only 4 districts offer algebra in grade 7, but it does mean that only 4 districts have enough students to actually qualify to be included on this chart. So you have to have at least 11 students enrolled to actually have that data count available to in the public release of information. You can see the struggle that high school students have with respect to algebra instruction. You can see where that median is. It drops dramatically in grade 9 because you have a much larger cohort of students potentially that are taking that assessment, and a challenge for districts that are high school districts in terms of having students pass that high school requirement of Algebra 1. When you look at K-8 districts, again, in grade 7, our students do very, very well because those are really considered to be our top math students. They take 6th grade pre-algebra, they take 7th grade algebra, they take 8th grade geometry. In grade 8, and this is important to recognize, that we have 2 levels of algebra that are offered in Warren Middle School. That's somewhat unusual for middle schools to offer 2 levels of algebra. Most middle schools will offer 1 level of algebra. That's kind of an honors algebra course. We actually align with what the high school does. We offer 2 levels in terms of a J and a K level, which allows students to go into honors, or it allows students to go into an accelerated track at the high school, which are 2 different tracks at the high school. So we align our programming very, very closely to what the high school is doing as well. Not all the regional districts do that. When you look at our geometry comparison, our students do very, very well in terms of geometry. But again, those are students, again, that from tracking in grade 6 are kind of on that accelerated track to be able to take Algebra 2 when they get to the high school, beginning in 9th grade. Right. Again, this is how we do. There's only 2 districts that have enough students in K-8 taking that geometry in 8th grade. All right. Just some notes about that comparison group. There's no one single school district. So when you look at all of those dots, there's no one single school district that's the highest rated for all grade levels. You'll see a distribution on that that's just kind of all over the place. So it's important to recognize that in terms of math and ELA. You just will not see one district constantly at the top in terms of the performance on that. 21 of the 22 school districts that are in that comparison group have at least 2 grade levels where, again, over 3 years, they're either seeing that they scored high, then scored low, and then scored high, or they scored low, then scored high, and then scored low. So they have this up and down trend that occurs over that 3-year testing window in at least 2 of their grade levels. So again, it's something, again, that not all grade levels or districts are demonstrating that upward trend in all of their areas. One district that didn't demonstrate that pattern was a 7-12 district. All right, so very unlike us. Performance comparisons differ. You know that from the K-8 and the K-12 configurations. It looks a little bit different when you remove some of those K-12 districts and compare just to the K-8 districts. Comparison group 2. There's only one K-8 school within this. That's Denville. So again, you can kind of get a sense of where does Warren compare to those larger districts. We're looking at language arts first. Okay. This is a shot of just math, just K-8, what 3-8, what that looks like in comparison to some of those other districts. Algebra 1. Algebra 1, just K-8, not all the districts. All right, and then comparison data for geometry. And then geometry, just K-8. So just information about just observations around that. Again, individual district course performance fluctuated really in the math from year to year, with the exception of Millburn and Bernards. Those two districts tended to be the top two districts in each of the years. They jumped back and forth between each other, but they tended to be the top two performing districts, especially in grades 3 through 7. All right, 6 of the 6 school districts, Millburn and Bernards included, just again had that, that trend of not having, or in at least 2 of their grades, had a pattern that was not constantly upwards or constantly downwards. Okay, they just kind of again had varying course results from year to year. And then, again, when you remove those 2 DFGJ districts, that kind of, again, squeezes that median a little bit more, and we're a little bit more closely aligned to those other 4 districts there. I'm not saying we shouldn't compare ourselves to them, but again, they are somewhat different in terms of their configuration and the way that they're organized. All right. With respect to ELA, same type of information. We, if you noticed, had some good trend data in ELA, and I'll show you that on the next setup there. We had 4 of our grades that had some really good trend information within that. All of the districts experience, again, these fluctuations in certain course levels with regard to their scoring. And no one district in ELA is rated the highest in any one given year. Comparison group 3, so these are all the regional districts. Again, you can see Warren is the brighter blue here. This is where I was saying within our ELA, you can see up here for grade 3, for the last 3 years, we've had an increasingly good performance in grade 8. Same thing with grade 7. Grade 6 has remained somewhat stable. Grade 5, we had increasing performance. Grade 3, we've had increasing performance. So we did, out of all but 1 grade, show a positive trend over the past 3 years, and that's been an area of focus in terms of professional development and work that's been taking place with that. So I thought that was something that was positive to note with that. For grade 3-8 math, again, you can see a lot of blue circles clustered on the higher end of those graphs over 3 years. The exception being really grade 8 again, which just tends to go up and down depending on the cohort of students that was within that group. And that's one of the reasons why we're looking at the math resource as well, is just trying to look at some of that information for students that don't track into algebra. Like, what does that look like for those students? What's the course experiencing and the programming for those students as well? All right. We do very well in our algebra, especially for grade 7. And I do note again, we are the only district in the region, in terms of who sends to Watchung Hills Regional High School, that offers 2 levels of algebra. It's done differently in all 4 districts. We tend to align ourselves with the high school because that's where our students are going, and we feel it's important that if they're taking high school courses here, that those high school courses here line up with what the expectation is with the high school. And that's not done in each of the districts. That's a little bit different across the K-8s. All right. And with that, we end up capturing a lot more students that take algebra in our district and potentially in some of the other districts. All right. So again, just looking at the K-8, removing the high school from that. Geometry, we do very well. Again, we're the biggest district, so we tend to have a cohort of students that's greater than 11 from any given year. It's not that the other districts don't offer geometry, but they don't have as big a group taking geometry. All right. And just, again, comparison group 3 notes and observations. In the discussions we have with the high school, and this is really important to point out, they give us feedback each year in terms of just our course placement, how our students do in each one of those courses. They don't give us individual information because they're no longer our kids. When they go to the high school, we don't have access to their records, but they give us trend information and they allow us to see like how our students are doing in general. The feedback from year to year is that our students are very well prepared when they go over to the high school. They're extremely complimentary of the efforts of the teachers at the middle school, and again, I think the preparedness of the students when they go over to the high school. More specific in terms of mathematics, again, there was no one district top performing of the region in any of the courses, in all the courses. That tended to vary. 4 to 4 districts had fluctuations from year to year. It just depended on the cohort of students, and the course results tended to be a little bit different based on that cohort of students. And our Warren Township 2019 math course results, are highest in 5 of the 8 levels offered in NJSLA. So again, majority of the levels we tend to perform or outperform the regional districts. With respect to ELA, again, no one district is top performing. Again, that trend of 4 districts tend to just have fluctuations from year to year with respect to the course, and 4 of 6 Warren Township grade levels have maintained positive 3-year ELA score trends. All right, so I think that's a positive as well. Just overall notes that are important to note. I mentioned about this advanced mathematics courses, the way we're structured is a little bit different than some of the other districts, so that accounts for why sometimes we have students that may not be performing. We're allowing more students access to that math. We have a very high passing rate, but it does mean sometimes that there will be students that are challenged by that. We may have some students that score at a level of 3, but we're giving them the opportunity to take Algebra 1. That is something, again, that sometimes parents make a decision to waive their students into Algebra K rather than having them take grade 8 math. Some of that's an issue with the high school because the high school suggests that you can't take honors bio unless you are successful in algebra in middle school. So we have a pretty big net that we cast with respect to identification for algebra. One of the things also to kind of recognize with that is that we are reviewing our math resources right now. That's something, again, that I think the board will be discussing as well, because I think that when you look at that grade 8 results, that's been a discussion that we've had for many years at the board level. How can we better serve that group of kids as well, and that cluster of students that kind of feed into that programming as well. All right. With respect to ELA, we have some really good steady growth that's going on within ELA. That's been a PD focus, a professional development focus now for a number of years. We've been working closely with a group called Gravity Goldberg LLC. So we have consultants from Gravity Goldberg that come to work with our teachers kind of during the day, doing coaching sessions with the teachers. You'll note that a number of high-performing districts also have Gravity Goldberg LLC working with them. So the Milburn, Wyckoff, Arona, Glen Rock, Ramsey, and Oakland, all of those districts are in our comparison groups. All of them work with Gravity Goldberg in the same way that we're working with them. So I think it's important that when we kind of look at results, we also look at the types of things that we're trying to do as a district to kind of address some of the areas that we feel we need continued growth.